Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Addressing mental health for families of students with disabilities during and after COVID-19 school closure. This webinar is presented by SEEK, Special Education Equity for Kids. Our mission is to advocate, educate, and legislate for the families of students with disabilities in Connecticut. I'm Barbara Distinti, president of SEEK, and my co-moderator is...
Hi, I'm Jen Laviano. I'm an attorney, a special education attorney in Sherman, Connecticut. I am on the executive committee of SEEK and the co-chair of the attorneys committee for COPA, which is the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates.
We are honored to have our esteemed panelists for today's roundtable discussion on mental health. If you guys could introduce yourselves, starting with Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Really nice to be with you all. My name is Chris Bogart. I am the director of the Sasko River Center, a multidisciplinary practice that is the result of a merger between Southfield Center and Sensory Kids. In addition to my work as the director there, I'm a clinical psychologist that does consulting with schools and working with kids with learning and emotional issues.
We're waiting for Olympia to join us because we had some technical difficulties on our end with her, but she's about to join us. So
she's about to join. So Melissa, if you go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Gagne, and I am a special education attorney. In my former career was in education for 20 years. I was everything from a school teacher to an assistant principal and a principal. And I am also on the board of directors at CCARC, which is a nonprofit that provides day and residential services for almost 200 adults with disabilities. And I am also the mother of a 23-year-old with severe autism.
Thank you very much. Steve, could you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Hernandez. I'm the executive director of the legislature's Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. I am formerly the policy director for the Commission on Children as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here with you today.
Terrific. And welcome, Olympia. Could you
tell us sorry about our
technical
technical difficulties?
Yes, we explained, but we're very glad you can join us. If you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, would be great.
Hi, my name is Olympia Della Flora. I'm currently the Associate Superintendent for School Development in Stanford Public Schools. Before coming to Stanford, I was a principal and teacher in Columbus, Ohio, and social emotional learning is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm really honored to be here and to offer some participation in the conversation.
Terrific, thank you very much. And Dawn.
Yes, hello, thank you for having me. I am the co-founder of the Westport Day School, which is an approved private special education program in Connecticut. Also the co-founder of a brand new program called Westport College Prep. We are a private and independent program for post-secondary students with special education needs. My background is in special education, and I have a doctorate in educational leadership.
Terrific. Thank you all very much for joining us. We've heard a lot of talk about ensuring mental health during the pandemic, but not enough about the strain that is placed on parents and caregivers of children with disabilities. Students with disabilities disproportionately are unable to access distance learning, leaving their parents at a loss of how to support them or educate them while trying desperately to stop their child from losing the skills. For many families, they're doing this while they're also working from home and managing their own anxiety and depression. Today, we'd like to talk about how we can help these families during the period of school closure. What special education rights do they have now and when schools reopen? And what can schools do to prepare for the social and emotional needs of these children now and in the future?
So because SEEK's mission includes the lives and educations of students who have disabilities, special education is always at our forefront, as well as equity. And there's often a misunderstanding about the category that covers mental health issues, which is under Congress's definition called an emotional disturbance. That's the label under the special education laws. It is, in our view, a very antiquated label and pejorative, and we really hate that term. It puts puts parents off, it puts educators off, and it really, while the definition encompasses students who have anxiety disorders, depression, and various other presentations of mental health challenges, the title is just so upsetting to many families. In fact, SEEK, one of our legislative initiatives when the legislature reopens, is to get Connecticut to change the label to something else. Under federal law, Connecticut can change the label. We do have different labels for certain categories. So as an example, in Connecticut, we have other health impaired, but we also have other health impaired ADD. We have specific learning disability, but we also have specific learning disability dyslexia. So what we're hoping to do at SEEK is change that emotional disturbance category to even an emotional disability, social emotional maladjustment, some other term that is less off-putting for families and educators. So I just wanted to cover that because a lot of people don't understand, parents in particular, in my experience, that just because your child's disability is not an academic one does not mean you're not entitled to services and supports in our public schools. So with that said, we're going to move on to some questions. The format of our panel today is that we're going to ask questions and we're going to ask you each to jump in. It's a conversation. We want our viewers to chat in the chat. We also have, and Jeff is posting, our Spanish translator for those of you who would like to participate. And we're just going to pose question after question. And if we evolve into a whole other topic and we get down a different road, we'll follow our way back, okay? So I think Babs, is yours the first question? Yes, it is.
I have the first question, but before that, I did want to do a shout out and a thanks to one of our board members, Stephanie Tournier Mitchell, who's came up with this topic. It's not something not like we haven't been talking about it, but she was saying, I really think a webinar on this issue is incredibly helpful. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Our first question is, what are some examples of how the stress and anxiety from an unprecedented situation like COVID quarantine and distance learning can manifest in children and teens with learning differences? So what have you seen? I guess what are specific examples of responses to this whole?
And I always like jumping in first on a panel. That way I come when the bar is still low before my other panelists have said something much smarter than what I would say. Anyway, I think that what's important to recognize here is that stress and anxiety has been on the rise amongst youth, adolescents, and kids really significantly over the last decade, long before COVID entered the scene. And I think the COVID epidemic has just brought it front and foremost because it plays exactly right into the things that trigger off stress, which is when you're in a situation where you don't feel like you're in control, when you don't have the ability to predict what's going to come your way, that tends to trigger off the body's alarm system. And then your body starts releasing all of the stress hormones. And that can lead you in a direction of feeling physically ill, feeling emotionally confused, feeling like you can't access your cognitive skills as easily. And then when you lay that over on kids with learning challenges or coping skills weaknesses, they're obviously in a position where they're much more vulnerable because they don't have a lot of the developmental maturity to be able to deal with it as effectively. So what I've been seeing in my work in private practice is that I'm actually impressed with how incredibly well many families and many kids have been dealing with this, because it is so unprecedented and so so unpredictable, and we don't know how long it's going to go on for and what the different permutations are going to be. But the things I've definitely been seeing is kids having significant difficulty in just keeping their curiosity and their motivation up on a day-to-day basis. Parents having significant difficulties balancing between their own work lives, their own activities beyond helping their kids access remote learning opportunities. And so what you end up seeing is a lot of kids who are expressing challenges with sleep. What parents are seeing is regressed behaviors, a lot of difficulties in kids having temper tantrums when they seem to have outgrown that already, kids having nightmares, dietary changes, so lots of different things that we have seen certainly for the last 10, 20, 30 years, but they're just exacerbated at this point And I think it's that lack of control, that lack of predictability that's leading into this.
Anyone else want to chime in on this? I think that's, yeah.
Chime in. I think it's important that we all recognize that all students are struggling, right? So it's, you know, this is not just the special education community. So then to add on learning disabilities or emotional disabilities or difficulties in self-regulation, it just makes it that much more difficult for our students. But we also have to remember that our families have lost all of their support on a day-to-day basis. So if they're in a private program or they're in a public school, they're getting lots of daily support. I mean, it takes a village, right? And they've lost that ability to get that support. And it is very challenging, I know, for schools. So we're trying to do things like increase social work support, get on the phone, get on Zooms, but there's limits to what we can do when we're not all together. So I think the families have, you know, been tasked with being a homeschool teacher, being a therapist. They don't have their support system. So it's all very difficult.
And
Yeah, I'd like to add the whole structure and predictability. You know, just as Dawn said, we, as much as kids will try to fight us about structure, we all know that structure and predictability is what's best for them. And when I think about some of our students with special needs and some of the parents that I've talked to since we've been through this process are, you know, we can't keep them on a predictable schedule. So that's very frustrating. They wake up every day and don't necessarily know how the day is going. Some of our parents are, you know, probably like us, sitting in front of the computer for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and not able to even interact with their child. So they're often on electronics and they're, you know, playing games. Maybe they're doing some work. And parents have now said, you know, I can't get them off of the phone now because that has become, you know, the caregiver of the child of the parent who's at home working. And then we also have our essential workers who are working different shifts during the day. And the struggle has been, even though we are providing these resources in Stanford, they're typically during the teacher workday. And so how do we offer that support for those parents that are struggling, that need help that might be outside of our traditional school day? So, you know, those are just some of the things that have come up with us here in Stanford, but it's hard because we can't, I mean, our schedules aren't even the same every day. So you're right, it's impacting everyone, and it's hard for children to understand why they don't get to go to school every day and why they're not seeing their teachers and their paraeducators and their support staff.
Thank you. And you know, while I just want to say firstly, thank you for the translation into Spanish, because there are so many of our families across the state that are facing difficulties that are almost exacerbated by the fact that they are linguistically inaccessible, unless we make an intentional effort. And then the other thing I really want to sort of lift up what Dawn said about this not being a competition. You know, I bet there are so many of our families out there listening right now thinking, you know, my kid is neurotypical. My kid is also facing challenges. It's also stressful for us. But when you think of this from an equity perspective, these disruptions for children who have special needs, specialized needs, who need specific type of continuous, consistent attention and intervention, this can be life-threateningly interrupting, and it can be damaging in a way that can be long-term. So it's important to look at this from an equity perspective, because that will really inform how it is that we address the issue and we really target where the biggest need is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think that's terrific answers to this first question. Jen, I think you have our next one.
So one of the questions that people keep asking us is, as many of you have alluded to, typically when parents are faced with children who are struggling, they take them to their therapist, they take them to the psychiatrist, they take them to the pediatrician, they have people to go to, supports to go to. And while many therapists have adapted very well to teletherapy, we're hearing from a lot of parents some concerns about how to access resources now when they can't take their children places, and also how to access insurance, because many families can't afford to front the money and then maybe seek reimbursement later. So if you could address current resources that are available to families, both for the children and for the parents and caregivers.
I'd like to jump in here. Good morning, everyone. And I do appreciate the conversation around this topic. It's near and dear to my heart. When I was a school principal in Hartford, one of the programs that I partnered with to bring social and emotional awareness into my entire school community following the Sandy Hook tragedy was through the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. I am not affiliated with them any longer because I am now an attorney, but when I was in education, I actually became a trainer of their work. And I cannot say enough about this group. I will post their website. But the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence has been working for the past, I want to say 15 to 20 years on research about how to teach emotion regulation skills to everyone, to school communities, to the staff, to the families, to businesses. Their program that is in many schools around Connecticut and around the world is called RULER. And RULER stands for how to recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate your emotions. And the program really teaches everyone how to do that. I had never been taught how to do this before I brought this program into my school community. And what it does is it gives everybody the same language. It gives everyone a foundation to be able to talk about their emotions, to recognize that there's anxiety and there's stress, and that kids are also home watching their parents be stressed and anxious, and they absorb that also. So how do they understand that, and how do they label what they're feeling? And once they've labeled it, how do they express it in a positive way so that they can ultimately regulate and function? And if you look at the website, it's ycei.org, www.ycei.org.
We posted it for everyone. Thank you.
There are resources for parents, for families, for educators. I can't say enough about this work. It transformed my school community. We went from the lowest performing school academically in the district to the highest in 5 years. And I will tell you, it wasn't because of curriculum writing or what we did instructionally. It was because we put a foundation of social and emotional learning in place. And the other thing I would say is the takeaway I would love everybody to have is there's an app that the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence put out, and it's called the Mood Meter. And so it's a free app. And I will say, I continue to use it. I can't say enough about this app, and what's great about it is kids can use this app on their own. And what it does is it asks you at any given time, you can sign on this app 100 times a day. And what it asks you to do is sort of identify how you're feeling. Are you feeling high energy and unpleasant? Are you feeling high energy and pleasant? Are you feeling low energy or unpleasant? Or are you feeling low energy? And it asks you to sort of point to where you are. And then it teaches you, it gives you language. Okay, so I'm feeling satisfied right now. And then it asks you, do you want to stay in the emotional state that you're in, or would you like to shift? And if you want to shift, it gives you strategies to do so. And then within the app, there's an entire library of resources, videos, guides, articles for kids, for families, for educators. And so I encourage everyone to download the Mood Meter app. It's something you can do with your family. It's something kids can do independently. And it's a way to really have them start to self-identify how they're feeling and to teach them some strategies on how to deal with how they're feeling.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Jerry Fleming, our amazing colleague, has posted the links to both the Yale site and the app on the chat.
I could just, if I could just piggyback on top of what Melissa's saying, I agree with her that the RULER resources are fantastic. I would just like to steer everybody to a podcast. Mark Brackett, who is the director of that program and the guy who's responsible for coming up with a lot of that information. Mark Brackett recently did a podcast with Brene Brown on Brene Brown's weekly podcast series, Unlocking Us. And it was a great 1-hour podcast where he talks about a lot of the different steps in Ruler, and it's incredibly accessible. I would encourage all parents to click into that. It's a free podcast series. There's lots of other great Brene Brown podcasts connected to that, but the Mark Brackett one I thought was great. And then a couple of other free online resources that I would love to steer people to. The National Association of School Psychologists, NASP, has been putting out a lot of different 7-minute podcasts or blog type posts, nsaponline.org. Again, they're free. You can click on them, and there's one for helping kids manage anxiety, helping your kids stay socially connected, things like that. So you can click on NSAP online. They've got a lot of free resources. The Child Mind Institute down in New York City, they've got some fantastic online resources, some podcasts, and some printed materials. And again, all of this is free material that really gives lots of wonderful direction for families in helping their kids, and also for parents helping themselves.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to post the links to as many of those resources as we can.
Babs, I think Dawn wanted to say something before we move
Yes,
on.
of course, please.
I just wanted to add one more resource that I really love. It's mindful.org. And it has a lot of resources on the topics that we're talking about here. Readings for parents, books for parents. I mean, we have to remember that the parents need as much support as we can possibly give them. And we have to do it electronically, unfortunately. And sometimes it's not about academic objectives. It's about getting themselves regulated and the family regulated, and getting and staying sane and safe in this time. So mindful.org.
Terrific.
And just if I
Yes.
may, I saw that someone asked a question about what about people resources as well,
Yes.
because some of our young people especially need people resources. I just want to emphasize, and I always love jumping into a love in on Yale, because the work that they're doing in Ruler is pretty remarkable because of the fact that it is toolkit based and very accessible. And I just want to emphasize that the supports around our young people that may need special attention and that may be special needs, the supports are also the parent is the first responder in a lot of ways. The parent is the first giver now. So they need the supports too. So some of these tools that we're talking about now are also for families, so that the whole infrastructure around our young people provide a supportive, responsive, regulated space for kids to be, especially during emergency.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very important, and because that's what we wanted to know, resources for children, but also for the parents, and that because they're working with this. I know that one of our specific questions that we had gotten from one of the people who's watching is specifically about insurance. Looking for a provider who's in network, who will respond back. And I mean, I know as a parent, I was in that same situation. You're just stuck, and you can listen to great podcasts, you can get great information, but how do I find an actual provider who's going to hopefully be in network and that hopefully I can afford? Do you have any advice for a parent who's in that kind of situation? Anyone?
I'll click in. I mean, they bring up obviously a really challenging issue that obviously has national implications as we struggle our way through how to move towards broader access to healthcare in general and mental health care in specific. The route that I would direct them to is some of the local community mental health organizations. Most of the local towns have different organizations that have licensed clinicians and that do participate in in various different healthcare panels. So when you think about I'm blocking on these, of course, right at this moment. I'll get a few of them before we finish up here, but there's like Jewish Child and Family Services of Norwalk, things like that, I'll get a few of the other ones that are accessible from insurance and then have qualified folks that are available. The other thing that that we're always willing to do at Sasco River Center is even if we are not within your panel, we're always willing to look at the provider sheets that are provided by the organization. So every healthcare company has their list of preferred providers that you can get online, and and if the client sends us that list in a PDF format, we're always happy to go through and say, we would recommend this person or that person or this person. What you can never tell is whether that person's actively open to new clients at this point. And that's always a challenge, is who is on the panel for the different insurance companies, as well as who's taking new clients. And I wish there were an easier way through that, but we're always happy to help with that first step of looking through the list of preferred providers and guiding to folks that we feel are qualified and working with kids or with families.
Great.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that under the IDEA, which is the Federal Special Education Law, parent training and parent counseling is a related service for an IEP. And during this time when parents are having to serve many roles, we've been encouraging parents to ask for that parent training. And this area of emotional behavioral support would certainly be a very reasonable area for a parent to ask for some parent training during this time.
Absolutely. I do want to just add, just because it's about insurance, and as a parent, I've walked this walk a little bit, and something I didn't know, which was when you have a complex child with quite a few needs and someone on the spectrum or whatever it is, you can ask sometimes for your big insurance company to actually assign them a case manager. Once I spoke to a case manager at my big insurance company, all these doors were open for me, or at least I got a lot more information. So if you have a child with a number of needs, mental, physical, whatever they happen to be, ask for a case manager. You might as well, it's not going to hurt. So I think that, and it helped me a heck of a lot. So let's move on to Jen. I think you have the next question.
I was just going to add one.
Sorry. Okay, go for
it. One underutilized resource, I think, is reaching out to your child's school. Because we have several partnerships between schools and with the district. We have student-based health centers in some of our buildings, and maybe typically you wouldn't have had to access, in a normal situation, you wouldn't have had to access the student-based health center. But a lot of those services are now being done through video, and you could still connect with a provider. So I would be remiss and to say that you should also check with your local school district, your school, and just ask if they have any partnerships, because a lot of times, we'll be able to directly refer you to that agency, and you can maybe not have to wait on a wait list or call around and try to figure out who you need to speak with. So we've been able to help several families in that way, but most of our families who were already accessing the student-based health center are the ones that are aware of the services. So I would just encourage you to say what services are available that you could help us with, the support or whatever it is that you're looking for.
Great suggestion.
Yes, thank you.
So many parents are reporting symptoms of regression in their children, fear, bedwetting, tantrums, refusal to do the work. One of the questions that many parents ask, and I love Dawn's statement, it's not a competition, but how far should parents push during this time? How do they know when to say, okay, I'm just gonna back off because my child isn't gonna do the schoolwork, or how far to push it during this time period?
I could start with some of the things that we're suggesting. We're suggesting not to push so hard. because we are trying very hard, and I know, other schools are as well. We're trying to provide ways for kids who are home right now to earn credit. So it could be, you might not be attending your art class right now on a regular basis, or only maybe for a few minutes. But if you are doing an art project at home, we want to see that art project. We want to give you credit for that art project. We want you to go take a hike this week and identify 5 signs of spring, for your art class, and then how you might be able to incorporate them into something creative at home. And, I think we're all learning that the education at home is going to look different, and we know that, and we're still really trying as hard as we can to provide the curriculum that we would provide if we were in school, but we're not in school. So we're trying to give kids a breadth of experience where they can kind of breathe a little bit and say, well, I can get credit by playing these math games at home with a family member, or online with a friend, or I can get some credit. So we're really asking families to start to think outside the box, relax a little bit about traditional curriculum, and celebrate what you are doing at home, bring it to the school.
Yeah, I'd like to add, thinking about implementing a schedule or structure from my own personal experience. At the beginning of distance learning, I think I'm an awesome teacher. I am a horrible homeschool teacher while also trying to work at the same time. So there was a lot of, I was like, you didn't even get dressed today. It's 12 o'clock. That can't happen. So what I started to do was we the night before, we come up with the schedule. What classes what assignments do you need to get done tomorrow? And getting dressed and brushing your teeth is on the list. Some household chores, folding clothes, sorting clothes, washing clothes. I try to mix it up and break it up. Also, giving them some breaks on screen time. This is also, okay, you can play games for an hour during this block, but then you have to take a break and you have to do something else. So that has been helpful for me. And the days that we talk about the night before, what are the things you have to do? It gives a little bit of structure and predictability as to what the next day looks like. So setting up a schedule for your kids that has a variety of activities and strategically putting in breaks as your kid needs them, I think could be helpful.
I have to say that, as a parent, you are your child, you are the expert on your child. But this is really, especially in emergency, this is where leadership matters. And it matters to have consistent, it matters to have thorough guidance on how it is that you can help support your child during this time. And it matters especially because I think parents are feeling right now that they have to figure this out. And these kids still have a right to equitable education opportunity. So leadership matters most now, and that guidance that parents are waiting for is critical. Yes, parents are experts on their own kids and all these great things that parents are doing. First of all, give yourself a break, but second of all, direct your energy to the place where it should be, which is, where is the guidance that I need from you in order to be able to enjoy an equitable educational opportunity for my child?
We couldn't agree with that more. And to that end, we Seek this week every Thursday night at 7 on Facebook Live. Last night we had the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Cardona, on as our guest. It is on our website, which is seekct.com, the video from last night. And we asked him some questions in this regard. Seek has been regularly responding to the guidance that has come out in terms of some concerns about the wide variability of how each school district is handling distance learning, particularly for students with disabilities. So we're with you on that.
And we try very hard to take the guidance from the state and Google Translate it, Seek Translate it for parents as to what does that really mean, and give the parents some action steps as to what they can do, whether it's, taking data, or noticing what's going on with their child, writing, what's the plan, what's the distance learning plan, especially, particularly for children in special education, but, it can work for all children.
I also think this is a time for families to be in communication with their school and with their teachers. So a lot of teachers, special education teachers, related service providers, regular general education teachers are working with families that are struggling with this type of thing. And they've, I have a client, they've tried the schedule, they've tried making a schedule with their child. They tried making a schedule for their child, and their child, it was just flat out refusing to participate. And my client's a single working mom who's trying to work and do all of this. And I encouraged her to reach out to the school, and they really stepped up. And the child's regular education teacher meets with him every day. His special education, not for long periods of time, checks in with him every single day. His related service providers are checking in with him. And I think what the child was unable to express to his mother was that he really missed his teachers. And he was shutting down because he felt abandoned by them, because he couldn't really understand that it wasn't intentional, that they weren't seeing him, that this he didn't have the cognitive ability to wrap his head around that. And as soon as he was able to access his teachers, things started to stabilize for him at home. So schools are really trying in many cases to work with families and try to make this adaptable for kids who maybe need something a little bit different to make this work for them. So I encourage you to reach out to your school and see if that's something that they can help you with.
Melissa, that's a great example, and that actually leads into my next question, which is specifically, what can schools be doing now to help students who are beginning to exhibit mental health challenges that have emerged because of the distance learning and quarantine? I mean, I'm sure that if it was, a lot of these kids are honestly being pushed into that stress and anxiety, and maybe it was tenuous, but now it's, official. What else can schools do to help those particular families, or how can families reach out to schools right now?
Again, I think it's important to understand what is the source of the struggle, and trying to really unpack that. And so again, going back to my last example, this parent really didn't understand, why, and as soon as she reached out to her school and it was through that they realized, wow. And he said, I miss you. And he cried the first time he saw his teacher on a Zoom chat. So I think understanding what it is that you're dealing with, which I go back to the ruler work, because that's what that work teaches, children and families how to do, is to try to recognize and understand what they're feeling. Because until what Mark Brackett always says, you can't tame it until you name it. And so you really need to understand exactly what it is, what the struggle is, what the source of that anxiety is, before you can begin to address it. And so I think schools need to be working with their families to first figure out what it is that child is dealing with, and then help them address it, and be willing to do like this particular school is willing to set up meetings with this child, and be willing to check in with families. And I think just communicating with parents, working as a team. What is it that this child needs? How do we help him or her regulate her emotions to be successful? Because the root of the anxiety is going to be different for every child.
Absolutely.
And just to jump on top of what Melissa is saying, and saying extremely well, is a lot of times I think we often jump into, okay, how can we solve this? Let's start going into solution mode. And if you lead first with just taking a step back, taking a deep breath, and lead with a little bit of empathy, and I want to really hear out where the struggles are, whether it's the parent speaking with the child, or the school speaking with the parent, or the school speaking with the child, really trying to draw out what the issue is, and really lead with compassion, and to share that we're all in a new situation and all trying to figure it out as we're going through. I found that a lot of times leading with empathy is the way that you can start then generating a lot of different possible solutions. The other thing that I've been very pleasantly surprised by when we go down this path, but also sometimes a little bit surprised in the direction of why aren't they doing this. Is there have been some schools that I've been working with students who are struggling or parents who are struggling, where they're not automatically reaching out to the school psychologists or the school counselors or the school social workers to be a part of the team to solve this. And these are folks that are trained, obviously, to often have some of the solutions to be able to allow students to most effectively access curriculum. And so making sure in whatever team you're developing to help a family, that one of those voices or all of those voices are part of that, I think is really critical, so that so that it's really approached as this is a whole team working together. We don't have some magic solution, but let's try to all team up to come up with a few ideas.
And sometimes the child's strongest connection in a school is to his gym teacher or his art teacher or to one of the school secretaries. I mean, sometimes, and so to really maximize any bond that child has with whomever that they feel the most comfortable with would be an important person who maybe under normal circumstances you wouldn't put on a team, but in these circumstances to sort of think outside the box and think, who is this child connected to? Let's put him or her on this team to help problem solve.
Melissa, you remind me of something, both you and Christopher. Honor the hierarchy of needs too. When you're experiencing stress because you're hungry, when you're experiencing stress because you're risking losing your home, our parents with children who are absolutely reliant on them in different ways experience this stress as presently and with even more of a sense of emergency. So honor those hierarchy of needs first. Yes, I need help managing these emotions of fear and frustration and stress, but I also just need to make sure that I can eat tomorrow and that my kids are going to be housed.
I think it's important to tell parents that you should always ask questions and continue to ask until you get an answer that you are satisfactory with. I don't remember who said on the call today, but you know your child, right? So you know if you're seeing changes in what kinds of things you may need. And I think for us, our school district is over 16,000. We have a wide range of socioeconomic, we have a wide range of needs, we have a large Spanish-speaking population. So we're trying to just make sure that we have multiple ways that parents can actually give us feedback and ask us questions, and we're trying out new things. I love the translation piece. We actually, last week, ran a parent webinar where we had a entire English speaking panel, and then the next hour we did entire Spanish speaking on the same topic. We got together, had the same talking points, and we got very good feedback from the parents. But the questions that were in the chat from parents, some of those were not things that we thought that parents would still have questions about, being in distance learning now for almost 2 months. So I think that it's important to seek that input from parents as a group. And you as a parent are your child's best advocate, and you have to hold us accountable as a school district to get you the answers and support that you need to help your child through not just this process, but even during the regular school year. And I think sometimes parents feel embarrassed or that they're the only one that has this problem. They don't want people to know that they're struggling. And, we can't really help you if we don't know what the issues are. So you have to be transparent with us. You have to be open and have honest communication, because otherwise, we're spinning our wheels, you're spinning your wheels, and we're not getting to the destination that we want to, which is helping our children be successful.
That's a perfect segue to our next question, Olympia, because one of the questions that was posted on the chat is really where the rubber meets the road, I think, in our conversation today. A parent who's desperately trying to get the geometry teacher to understand that her son is not able to access that level of thinking right now and is overwhelmed by it. And many parents ask us these questions well before school closures about how do we get our schools to understand how very different learning is for students who have needs in the area of an emotional disturbance under the category under the law, mental health challenges. And I know I'm speaking to the converted with this entire panel about how we've been talking for years about getting our schools to look at discipline from this lens, to look at education from this lens. And the one silver lining I'm certainly hoping will come out of this pandemic is that educators will start to understand the importance of this aspect of learning. This social and emotional learning piece is so huge, and we realize that now. So my question to you all, it was our next question is, how can schools, when they reopen, even if it's a hybrid reopening between blended learning, distance learning, and in-school instruction, how can schools address social and emotional learning from a perspective for all students, but particularly how it impacts students with disabilities?
If someone has the answer to that, I will be very thankful to you for today. I'll just say, there's just so much unknown about this. And when I think about this from a district level, the social emotional needs, it would be those students, but also those teachers, because I'm pretty sure we can all agree that most of our teachers and our support staff have such great relationships with kids, and to know that these children may come to us differently. The other moving needle with this piece that I would like to say that we're thinking about with our kids that are coming back is, what have they experienced? We've had some children who've been very engaged with distance learning and then they fall off the map. And when we call to find out, well, they may have had a death in the family, or they may now be quarantined in another home away from their parents. And so these moving pieces and parts, so you may be fine one day and then you're in total trauma and crisis the next. So just being aware that each household is going through something differently, and trying to think of, programs such as Ruler that Melissa spoke of that are going to be, hit tier 1, because everybody's going to need some support on how to deal with this. How are we helping teachers to understand that SEL is going to be utmost at the top before we come in and say, hey, take this test in reading, math, and science, because we need to know where you're at. The kids, it's a shock to the system. So awareness, and just continuing to tell our story. You have the best story. If a policymaker makes a law, they're not the ones that are impacted on the day-to-day of working with kids with special needs. So you have to continue to tell the story to get the importance of SEL out to the larger community who does not understand.
I think it's also important to kind of communicate to families that whether you're in a big public school or you're at a small private school, we're all going back to something incredibly new. It's uncharted territory and we're all learning. And we know that when we as a school district or a small school have put learning practices into place for distance learning, we know we're not perfect. We know this is not ideal. It's not ideal for anyone, and we're trying. Communication is the key. I think it helps us to have parents communicate with us, because we learn so much about what's behind the scenes for that one individual child. And I do think, like Olympia said, like an individualized approach is so important. But when we get back to school, one of the cornerstones of our program is unconditional positive regard, and dealing with students in a way, and families that's not judgmental. That's, let's explore. Let's look at this with a curious mind. Let's explore how we can help and not judge, and just solve the problems as we get them. And I think if we do that as a team, parents and schools, teachers, administrators, I think if we all do that for each other, instead of blaming or judging, we really need to work together. And if we can take that approach at the micro level or the macro level, I think we will be helping ourselves and helping our districts.
I think another thing, just to our parents out there who may feel, especially parents of children with special needs, parents of children who are living in poverty, parents of minority children, you may feel that no one is telling you, no one is giving you consistent information. People don't know what they're doing. It may feel that way. And I have to tell you, this ship is really being built, not to overuse this, but it's really being built as it flies. So your instinct that this isn't working is spot on, because I have to tell you, the educational system in this state was already not working for our kids with disabilities. It was already not working for our kids of color and the poor. So we have to come out at the other side of this demanding something absolutely different than what we had before. Because to my mind and to the mind of people who are trying to advocate for change, it's a scandal that we're leaving behind so many of our children, because it's either too expensive, is what we say, or we are not sure of what supports that we can provide to all of our children equitably. We have to demand different.
Okay.
One of the things I would, oh,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No,
One
go
of-
ahead, Melissa.
One of the things I would advise school districts to do, I know I've been talking about Ruler, and there are other social emotional programs that other school districts have used and had success with, but that absolutely in the fall, when whatever the hybrid looks like, that schools prioritize a social and emotional learning program, a research-based program that is something that is not just accessible to all students, all families, all staff members, but is something that the entire community can get around. Because when everybody is speaking a common language around this in a school community, that's helpful for everyone. It's helpful for regular ed students. It's helpful for special education students. The Mood Meter app that I told you about, it's very helpful if a teacher that maybe doesn't work with a child, but maybe has to interact with the child for some sort of a disciplinary reason. It's very helpful for that teacher to be able to say to the child, where were you on the mood meter when this happened? Let's talk about that. It's really powerful. So whatever program a school district may want to put into place, but just to have one and have that be the priority. And you know, to Stephen's point, to spend the money to train not just the staff, but to train the families and the entire community so that everyone's speaking the same language. And getting buy-in sometimes is not always easy. I think that might be different because of the pandemic, but I think it's critical that districts cannot reopen a school without some sort of a social and emotional learning program in place for the whole community.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much. So last question we have is, how can we prepare our students for the fact that even when they return to school, it will function and feel very differently from when they left? How do we prepare them, especially young children, for the potential shock returning to school could be after such a long time in isolation?
While you're all thinking on that, I just wanted to also point out that one of the things that SEEK has advocated for, and our position papers on our website in terms of schools reopening, is that there be a screening on the social and emotional piece so that educators know where students are returning, because they probably left in a very different place in that regard.
And I would just say, depending on, on the child, on the age level, and what would be appropriate. I know for younger children, a social story would be very helpful, with pictures saying this is what it's going to look like. This is maybe what it looked like before. This is what it looked like when we were home. And this is what school's going to look like when we go back to school, and reviewing that social story with them. For obviously for children who are younger, but for older kids who might have that kind of anxiety, doing a higher level version of that, just on a tablet or an iPad, and just really, I think it's important and school districts I know will communicate to families, this is what school is going to look like in the fall. Here's how it's going to be different, and some of your classes might be online and some of your classes might be in person, but to really give students an opportunity to visualize what that's going to look like. So maybe taking a video of the building and what social distance classes might look like, because a lot of what creates the anxiety for kids is the abstract concept of what social distance or anything might look like. So being able to give them some concrete visual examples, I think, will be very helpful, that are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate.
I also think it's important for school administrators to have a really good sense of a communication system, whether it's email or phone calls or whatever it is, because we're all still waiting to hear from the State Department of Education what that will look like. there's no one that wants to know more than us. So we know we need to make a plan, but we can't make a plan without that information. And we know it's based on health and safety first and foremost. So I think it's really the responsibility of the educators and the administrators to make sure we communicate when we do, as soon as we have that information, what it's going to look like, and then how we're going to support them so they can use social stories, so they can use tools and strategies that our social workers suggest, so they can go and when they see Chris in his private practice, they can work on preparing students. But we can't, none of us can prepare just yet. And that's so frustrating. So I think as educators, one thing we can do is we can commit to parents that as soon as we know, and we create that plan, we're gonna work day and night to make sure we communicate exactly what that's gonna look like in each of our buildings.
I think one more thing I'd like to just say, because it's been coming up for us, are children wearing masks. And this has really come up, especially for children with sensory issues, as well as, you know, our small children. And so I would just encourage parents to start having those conversations with your children about why we're wearing masks, just like how we have to teach kids how to wash their hands. And, you know, some kids maybe have not left their home since we've been in this pandemic. And so they maybe have not had to wear a mask or actually see people out with masks, because that also can be traumatic for kids who don't understand. So I think, you know, trying to provide as much support and structure to help them understand. I know one of our elementary schools for their morning message did show off your mask day. And they had kids send in pictures of them wearing their masks. So they're already starting to say, like, this is not, it's a cool thing to wear your mask. It's acceptable. So, you know, it was a way that you're starting to help children understand that school's going to look different when we actually come back in person. So.
Great. Jen, did you want to say something, my dear?
Yes, we're getting ready to close up this fantastic discussion, and we really appreciate all of you spending time with us today. One of the things I just want to say as an attorney who's been representing children and their parents for 24 years is so often parents call me when there's a crisis, right? But there was a lot that led to the point where they're calling a lawyer. And very often, particularly for students who have anxiety and depression, that is something that, because parents know their children best, as we've all said, they've been seeing at home for quite some time the signs of that. And many of the parents who are listening and watching now are probably seeing that bubble over, more so now than before, because with the structure and support of school, many kids hold it together all day and come home and sort of fall apart. And so what I just want to say in this regard is some families still, despite it being 2020, feel like it's shameful in some way to acknowledge that there's any of this symptomatology. And I've seen many parents who don't share really critical information with their schools that would have led to an evaluation and a referral and supports that could help the children. And so I encourage parents to make sure that you are telling your school if you're seeing things during this school closure that are worrying you or are exposing a greater issue than before school closed. Please tell your school, get a referral so that we can make sure that your child gets the supports that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, to our panelists for joining us on our SEEK webinar. This is really important, and I think you've helped a lot of people. We will, this is recorded. We're going to post this on our Facebook page, so you'll be able to see it. We have a number of wonderful links to resources, so we will continue this conversation. Obviously, keep watching us on Thursday nights on SEEK This Week. We try to give you the latest as to what's going on, because as Steve was saying and everyone else is saying, it changes every week. So we're trying to also discern what that means for you, for your child, for your plan. Just a reminder, you can learn more about SEEK at seekct.com. We are a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization, and your donations are really appreciated. Because of your donations, we're able to have a Spanish translator for our webinars, including today's. And our next webinar is going to be June 16th at 7 p.m. about transition for students with disabilities. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Another special shout out to, again, Stephanie Tournier Mitchell, whose idea it was to do this webinar, and also to Jerry Fleming for moderating our chat. Thank you very much, Jen Laviano, and our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much. Take care.